name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Christ is born.
Glorify him.
Christ is born.
Glorify him.
Today's the leave taking of the feast, so Christ is born.
Glorify him.
Or the after feast, I guess. Technically, it's not the leave taking. This is a cool gospel reading. I didn't start with this as one of my favorites. But it's a very, very demonstratively excellent gospel proclamation for probably many reasons, but in particularly because it shows you the continuity from when the Lord said, "Let us make man in our image," to right now today. You see, when we complicate matters and divide things between Old and New Testament, which we shouldn't do, it's one testament. It is one record of the involvement of the Holy Spirit with mankind since the beginning. We don't have, we treat them both like two separate stories, and they shouldn't be treated that way. What you find in the new was promised in the old. You see types or prototypes of the realities that Christ embodies, fulfilled or established, the ideas established in the first covenant. You have the image, the record of Joseph hearing the angel say, "Take this woman as your wife." No, this child will be born of God. This will be the son of God. It's okay, Joseph, marry her. And the angel then told him to go flee to Egypt because it's about to get hot around here. You're going to have to go to Egypt. It's about to get dangerous for you and your family. Go flee to Egypt. And Joseph paid attention and did that. But you see, it wasn't just to avoid Herod, who was slaughtering the innocents, as Pharaoh of old had done. When Moses was born, the birth of Moses was foretold. And Pharaoh was so afraid that there was somebody there to usurp his place. And so he slaughtered all the children, 2 years of age and under. And Moses was saved because of the sacrifice of Yahweh, his mother, and pulled out of the water. The name Moses, scholars say, means drawn from the water in ancient Egyptian. I don't know how much of a stretch that is scholarly wise, but the name Moses means something else in Hebrew, but in ancient Egyptian it means drawn out of the water. So we have the image of a slaughter already. This is rooted in the story of deliverance out of bondage for the people that God had called to himself. He delivered them by way of Moses out of captivity in Egypt into the promised land after 40 years in the desert. After leading them to know that he is their God and they are his people. It doesn't take 40 years to walk from Egypt to Israel, by the way. Even when I'm walking, I would get there before 40 years had elapsed. So it wasn't necessary that they walked as the crow flies, but it was necessary that they walked for a sufficient amount of time so that they would learn how to be God's people and to recognize that he was their God. And he delivered them out of bondage and away from the slaughter. And we see this in the gospel proclamation today. Christ was taken into Egypt at the instruction of the angel to Joseph. Christ, his holy mother, James, the son of Joseph, and Joseph himself fled into Egypt so that when the angel said it's time to return because Herod is dead, the threat to your life has been eliminated, then the Lord left Egypt and entered back into the promised land. You see, he would lead his people out of bondage, not just the people who were in, it wasn't that they were in bondage to Caesar, which on some level they were, as much as you and I are in bondage to the tax man. Very much. Well, that's an argument for another day. Taxation is theft. they were not in bondage per se. Everybody who was a citizen of Rome or a conquered people of the Roman thing, they were sort of in bondage in a way, but it was only a matter of taxation and being under that law. They weren't literally slaves anymore like they were in Egypt. But the Lord came to deliver his people, us. It wasn't just the remnant that had returned to Israel from captivity that he was delivering. This wasn't just the Messiah promised to Israel for themselves. This was the Messiah who came to save. He came to save all people. It was glad tidings of great joy that was for all people. Because they were in bondage to sin and idolatry. And salvation came out of Egypt. Deliverance came out of Egypt. It was a sufficient enough facet of their identity, the people who had been delivered through Moses by God, that they would recognize the imagery, if they had eyes to see, that indeed the Messiah came out of Egypt to deliver them. Some believed and some did not, as you well know. Many of the Jews did not believe. Many of the others didn't believe. Many of the Gentiles did not believe. But those who had eyes to see were able to see where this deliverance came from and what manner of deliverance it was. This humble king who was born in a cave, a stable of dumb beasts, and to whose the glorious news was delivered to shepherds, because they were the most fit to receive this news, because they embodied humility. The theme here, obviously, is that deliverance comes by way of humility. We're meant to see this in today's gospel proclamation. We hear about Joseph, the betrothed of the Mother of God. Now, think, this is a man. How many of you are retirement age?
Not me.
How many of you have you reached retirement age and still can't retire? That's more how it's going anymore. I'm a priest. I retire in a casket. That's how that's going to go. How many of you are up for it? An angel appears to you and says, hey, you're going to have this young girl in your house and you're going to take care of her. She's a temple virgin and we have to assign her to you. Now, Joseph and Mary were kinsmen. She wouldn't have been delivered to the Smiths down the street just randomly. He would have been one of her kinsmen out of the tribe of Jesse. They were probably third cousins on her father's side or something. They were tangentially related by blood. And she was sent into Joseph's house. And then she comes up pregnant. It was a great scandal for a temple virgin to come up pregnant. And so the scriptures tell us he was minded to put her away, to get out of the arrangement. The marriage had not yet been solidified, and this woman is pregnant. I have to distance myself. And it was the wise thing by common standards to distance himself from that. I don't need this in my life. How many of you at retirement age who have lost your wives? He was a widower, he was an elderly man. How many of you are up for it? Let's take a pregnant girl into our house and marry her at 60, 70, however old he was. I didn't see any hands go up. So this was, by the world standards, a wise thing for him to do, get out of the arrangement. And the angel said to him, don't do this. And so he obeys the angel because he was a very pious man, an old pious man. And when the angel says to go to Egypt, to go away from your people and hide in Egypt, Joseph obeys. The fathers, you see stories where a disciple will approach an elder and say, I believe an angel's visiting me in my cell every night. And the elder will tell him, ignore it. Because you're not pious enough to recognize whether it's an angel or a demon. Evidently, St. Joseph was pious enough to recognize and distinguish between an angel and a demon, and to obey. He was humble enough. He was a man of humble stature. And he was able to discern that it was a true angel and it was a message from God. And so he did as he was bidden to do. There isn't a lot of biographical information about St. Joseph. We know that by the time Christ was a teenager, he was probably dead. The tradition of the church tells us he died at the age of 100. A ripe old age even today, an even riper age then. He was quite elderly, but he died as a very elderly carpenter. The Mother of God, if she had Christ, say, at 15, she would have been in her mid-40s when he started his public ministry. Joseph would have been a very, very elderly man. But we don't have a lot of information about him. We have icons of him, but anytime you look up any of the biographical data, the hagiography about St. Joseph the Betrothed, it is very truncated, very, very, very short. We do not have a whole lot of information about him, but he figures very, very much importantly into the story of our salvation. Not in the same way as the Theotokos, but no less important. And it is because of his humility and his piety. And it is an example of humility and piety that we are to follow. Because again, deliverance comes through humility. If we are ever wondering how the Lord means to save us, how can I be changed? How can I extricate myself or allow myself to be extricated from the messes I make for myself through sin and through pride? It's through humility, because deliverance comes by way of humility. Think of St. Joseph and obey. The Lord gives us messages all the time. The Lord acts through angelic people. Nancy may not be an angel. Nancy is a human being. But Nancy God speaks through Nancy when Nancy tells me good things that I need to hear. Nancy is acting in an angelic fashion. Nancy's a sinner, I know that. But Nancy's acting in an angelic fashion. The Lord speaks through other people. The Lord brings messages. And when we recognize that the message is from God, and we are to listen even when we don't want to, even when what people are telling us is contrary to our desire, because I want to indulge myself. And my selfishness and my pride, that's what I'm all about. The Lord speaks in angelic ways. And if we have ears to hear, and if we are behaving in a humble way, and if the state of our heart is humility, we will hear the message delivered to us by God, and who is using someone else as a messenger, sometimes even an angel. We will obey, and we will recognize that deliverance is at hand. But it cannot be laid hold of, it cannot be embodied, it cannot be embraced outside of humility. Humility is not easy. What's easy is to indulge myself. It takes effort to step outside of my own front door, of the front door of my heart where I worship myself. It takes effort, and it takes a degree of dedication and piety and humility to even take that first step. But if I want to be delivered, if I want to be delivered by the Son of God out of captivity and slavery to sin, then I must take that first humble step. I must embark on my 40 years in the desert, because it will take that long and more for me to find the way to be perfectly obedient like St. Joseph. So through the prayers of St. Joseph, may we all develop an appetite for humility that will give us the encouragement to indeed follow and obey. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
Christ is born.
Glorify him.